Hello, gorgeous. Welcome to HG Radio, everything beauty, cancer, and inspiration. Here is your co-founder and host, Kim Becker.
Hello, gorgeous. You are listening to Hello, Gorgeous, everything beauty, cancer, and inspiration on Society Bites Radio, social interaction for the mind and soul. I'm your host, Kim Becker, once a hairdresser and salon owner, now the founder of a nonprofit organization that coaches and trains women with cancer to help them smile when they look in the mirror. And if you ask me, I will tell you, I have the best job in the whole world. This episode is brought to you by Amplified Marketing Group. They specialize in affordable mobile solutions that will get you noticed and help you retain customers. Check them out at www.amplified.marketing. Our guest today is Frank King. Frank, a suicide prevention speaker and trainer, was a writer for The Tonight Show for 20 years. Depression and suicide run in his family. He's thought about killing himself more times than he can count. He's fought a lifetime battle with major depressive disorder and chronic suicidality, turning that long, dark journey of the soul into 5 TED Talks and sharing his life-saving insights on mental health awareness in associations, corporations, and colleges. A motivational public speaker who uses his life lessons to start the conversation, giving people permission to give voice to their feelings and experiences surrounding depression and suicide, and doing it by coming out, as it were, and standing in his truth and doing it with humor. He believes that where there is humor, there is hope, and where there is laughter, there is life, and nobody dies laughing. The right person at the right time with the right information can save a life. Hi, Frank, and welcome to the show.
Hi, well, that introduction pretty much took all our time. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in, and please subscribe, download, rate and review.
That's what I love. You know, I'll tell you, when my friend Jan McGinnis connected us, you know, my topic and your topic, there's darkness in both of those topics. There's darkness in cancer, and there's obviously darkness in depression and suicide, you know, the thoughts of suicide. And that's why I was so excited to have you on as my guest today, because there's always a bright side. You know, you just have to find it. And sometimes it takes a little bit of looking, but, you know, I feel like laughter can just cure so much. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I'm not sure cure, but it is therapeutic. It is palliative, a word I have trouble saying. It's either laugh or cry. So you might as well, if that's your choice. And, you know, there's people say, is there anything funny about, you know, depression, thoughts, suicide? No, but there is humor in the topic. You just have to know where to look for it.
And what prompted you to, I mean, it takes vulnerability to actually stand up and share some of those thoughts that were in your introduction. That's not something that just comes natural. And it's like what I find with women with cancer. You know, after you're diagnosed, either you become an advocate and you are a wife, a mother, and a cancer survivor, or it's done and over with and you never talk about it again. So what prompted you, what made you really want to get up in front of these audiences and share your experiences and help people find the humor in their own situations?
Well, I started comedy full-time day after Christmas 1985, and I rode that horse until mid-90s when the comedy club boom busted. And I've always been a clean comic, so I decided to make the jump from the barroom to the boardroom, from the club to the, you know, to corporate, and joined the NSA, National Speakers Association. And everybody there had a message. Everybody there was, you know, trying to make a living and a difference, except for me. I was famous. My tagline was "Make a living, not a difference," although I was terribly jealous of those who did have a message, who were making a difference. So I cast about for years, actually decades, to find a way to go from being a funny speaker to a speaker who is funny. Mm. It wasn't until I learned what the barrel of my gun tasted like in 2010, spoiler alert, I did not pull the trigger, that I know. I got
which I'm grateful for. I'm really grateful you didn't do that then.
Yeah, the audience usually gives me a nervous laugh at that point, and I've got a story to follow up, which I tell them. A friend of mine was in the audience at a keynote. He'd never heard me say that I didn't pull the trigger. Came up afterwards and says, "Hey, man, how come you didn't pull the trigger?" I go, "Hey, man, could you try to sound a little less disappointed?" So I look back at my family history, which is of generational depression and suicide. Grandmother died by suicide. Mother found her. Great aunt died by suicide. My mother and I found her. I was 4 years old. I screamed for days. I'll spare you the story. It's in my first TEDx talk called A Matter of Laugh or Death. And so I realized that was what I was meant to speak about, was suicide prevention. So I got some education in suicide prevention, and I had to rebrand from being just a funny guy to a guy who, had something to say, something to teach, learning objectives, able tos, how tos. And so my wife said, "Well, do a TED Talk." And I said, "What's a TED Talk?" Famously. And just so happens that week, in the email came an invitation to apply for a TEDx talk up in Vancouver, British Columbia. So I applied and I got it. And that was the beginning of my rebranding from a funny speaker to a speaker who is funny. And I've since been invited to 7 TEDx events. I was only able to make 5 because of conflicts with full fee speaking gigs. Broke my heart, but that's why I do what I do. It's my purpose, it's my passion, and it is extremely therapeutic to help people in that way.
And so I love, like I said, I'm honored to have you on our show just because of what you do and how you were able to take that perspective and look inside and say, look, all these people had a message. And even though your message wasn't one that was funny, you actually turned it and be able to help people. And I love that. But you wrote jokes for the Tonight Show for like 20 years. Like, how did all of that happen? Because obviously that was kind of the start of your comedy career.
Yes, I was on the road doing stand-up, and Jay Leno, I don't know if you recall this, but Jay Leno was the permanent guest host for Johnny Carson.
Mm-hmm.
And Johnny was a bit mercurial. He would pull up on a Friday night and say to his staff, "I'm taking next week off," which meant that, Monday night was Best of Carson, a rerun. That meant Jay had 4 nights, 4 monologues, 18 jokes a monologue to produce over the weekend. So he started contracting with club comics to write topical jokes and fax them in. We were called fax writers back in the day. And so when Jay got the word he was working the following week, we'd get the word, "Hey, we need jokes." So I would fax in 12, 2 dozen jokes a day, and I'd average 1 or 2 in the monologue. And then when he took the show over for real, when he became the host, they let most of the contract labor go, but they kept me and a couple of guys on to continue fax writing or, emailing, I guess, nowadays. And so we rode that horse until he left the show, and went over to CNBC.
And so how did that feel like to be sitting in your living room and like watch Jay Leno deliver a joke that you wrote? Like, what would that feel like?
Like the lottery. Back in the day, I used to travel with a VCR so that I could record the Tonight Show, because I'd go to bed early. I'd come home from a show, like a comedy show, where I worked, and I'd go to bed, and I'd get the next morning, I'd, rewind the videotape and sit there and listen to the monologue. And we were all working from the same source material. So, the topics, everybody was working with the same topics, came out of the newspaper. What you're waiting for is, okay, there's a setup. That's the topic I wrote a joke on. Is it going to be my punchline? And oftentimes, I beat out the staff writers and all the other fax writers, and it was my joke that he did. And so he paid $50 in the beginning a joke, and $75 when he was working at, as host of the Tonight Show. And it was fun to hear my joke come out of his mouth. And I when I write comedy for anybody, I try to write in their voice. Yeah, so Jay Leno is, a couple of guys working. So one time he did a joke I wrote for him, syllable for syllable, meaning it was exactly the way he would have done it. Most of them, he changed it a little bit here or there. But one night, one joke, and I can't recall what it was, but it was just dead on. It was exactly what I wrote. So I nailed his voice once, syllable for syllable, which I was pleased about.
That's awesome. Well, and what a great claim to fame too. You know what I mean? To be able, not everybody can say that. So I think that's pretty cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, and he's a nice guy. When he left the Tonight Show, I asked him to do a little video testimonial for me. NBC doesn't let me do that. But he said, "Look, Frank, if you get another shot at a morning show," because I was a co-host on a morning show in Raleigh, in my old hometown. "If you get another shot at at a morning show or anything big time, that you really want, call Helga, his assistant, give her the name of the guy or gal and the phone number, and I'll call him up and see if I can't get him to give you the gig. So I've had that in my pocket for years. I'm just waiting for the right opportunity for Jay to call up and strong arm somebody into hiring me.
That's awesome. What a great ace to have in your pocket, though. Not everybody can say that either.
Yep. And he's just that way. He does things, helping me out. Well, it doesn't really benefit him in any way. When I had my first heart surgery, I was born with an aortic valve that was malformed. So at 39, I had my first heart surgery. The first call on my voicemail after surgery, hey, I heard you had heart surgery. It's a good thing you didn't have it done in L.A. They take the heart out and leave it out. So it was Leno, called just because one of the other writers told him I was in the hospital having heart surgery. So he took time out of his day to call and say, get well, which I thought was really classy.
That's very cool. And that you meant enough to him that he was willing to do that. I think that's awesome. That's awesome.
It's just the way he's wired.
That's awesome. So let's talk more about the work that you do. So you're close. Your niche is more like depression and suicide. So how do you spot the signs of the symptoms of depression and suicide?
By the way, important for people who are going through cancer treatment, and also, and people tend to forget, important for the caregivers.
Yes.
Cares for the caregiver. So let's say you have a friend who's going through cancer treatment and they have a caregiver, a husband, a wife, whatever. The signs of depression, this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but some of the more obvious ones are letting personal hygiene go. Mm-hmm. So if the person is generally put together pretty well, but their hair seems a little dirty, clothes are not quite so clean, it may be because they're having difficulty getting out of bed in the morning and getting to the bathroom to shave and run a load of wash. So there's Zoom casual, and then there's your depressed casual. So you can even tell the difference when you're doing a Zoom or a Skype, a video. Also, people who are depressed oftentimes have trouble getting where they need to be first thing in the morning, but they tend to rally in the afternoon. That's another sign. Or back when we had social activities before the pandemic, if they're not taking joy in the social activities that used to bring them a great deal of joy, they were there at the softball game every week with their team, or the bowling league, or the dart league, and all of a sudden they're not showing up as often as they did. They don't seem to be taking the same joy in the competition or whatever. So those are signs, and of course the question comes up. Let's say you spot one of those. What do you say? Here's what you don't say.
Yes.
Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Turn that frown upside down. Have you tried fish oil? Oh yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. And here's what you do say to somebody you believe is depressed. I'm here for you, and you got to meet it. I know you're not crazy, lazy, or self-absorbed. I know that the depression is an illness, a mental illness. Here's the good news. With time and treatment, things will get better. I will take the time. I will help you get the treatment. And here's the question that's most difficult to ask. And if you can't ask this, find somebody who can. You need to ask them, are you having thoughts of suicide? Just like that. Yes, because, there's an old urban legend that you should never mention the word suicide in front of somebody who's depressed. And I love the reasoning. It might give them the idea. Oh, yeah, like that didn't cross my mind.
Beforehand, right.
Yeah. No, they are less likely to die by suicide if, in fact, you do mention it. Here's why. Roughly 8 out of 10 people who are suicidal are ambivalent. They want somebody to notice something and interrupt. And 9 out of 10 people who are actively suicidal, in the last week, the last 7 days leading up to an attempt to give hints, verbal, nonverbal, behavioral, direct, indirect. So that tells me that if 8 out of 10 are ambivalent, 9 out of 10 are throwing off hints, it's the most preventable cause of death on the planet if you just know what to look for and listen for. Now, let's say they don't admit they're suicidal, but you suspect, and I always say go with your gut, your intuition. How do you know? Well, if they're talking about death and dying,